Welcome folks that have made it here. I'm Joan Casey, one of the co-chairs of the ISEE North American chapter. We are super excited to be joined by two NIEHS program officers today, A.B. Boyles and Carol SHREFFLER, that are going to talk to us about K99 R00 awards. So I'm going to kick this off and just talk very briefly about my experience because I wrote one of these and received one during my postdoc. And then I'm going to hand it off to them for the majority of the session. So I thought I would just mention a couple things. So this is kind of a suggested timeline of what I thought about doing when I was writing my K99 for the first time. And so I think it's helpful when you're finishing up your PhD. You probably won't have time to start actually writing the K99 because you need to finish your dissertation work. But you can start thinking about the topic and where you're going to kind of end up for your postdoc and start cultivating those main mentors that will be serving for you on your K99. And then in the first year of your postdoc, you probably want to start thinking about drafting the specific aims. And then you will show those aims to a variety of people, including your mentors, other postdocs, anyone basically that you can get to read your aims, and then you will revise them, and you will keep doing that for, a large majority of the writing of the K99 R00. I've had people tell me that you should spend 80% of your time on the specific aims page for the K99. That might be a little extreme, but it's definitely over 50% of the time, I think, probably should be spent on those specific aims. And then you'll draft the rest of the proposal and submit. And then very few people are lucky enough, I think, to receive a fundable score on the first iteration during their first submission. So then it's very likely during the second year of your postdoc that you'll actually need to resubmit the K99 R00 and hopefully then get funded and complete your IRB and other paperwork. These are just a few resources that I think you'll become great friends with during the course of writing your K99 R00. So standard due dates, looking up things on the NIH website. You're going to want to carefully read the NIEHS strategic plan and link what you're proposing to this plan specifically. You'll be looking at the program, the funding opportunity announcement here that will have a lot of details on what actually goes into your award. I highly recommend getting this book, the Grant Application Writer's Workbook. It kind of walks you step by step through writing an NIH grant, and I found it really, really helpful the first time I started writing my K99. You'll also want to become familiar with NIH Reporter. So this is where all funded grants, you can look them up online. One thing that might be helpful is to look up who received K99s in the prior year, what the topics were, their summaries. So you can actually type in the program announcement, this number into NIH Reporter, and then you can actually get the list and click on and look at these different grants. You also probably want to search on whatever topic you're writing about. So I wrote about unconventional natural gas development or fracking. And so I just did a search in that topic area for grants. And then you can look up what other people have been funded to do in the same area of work. Finally, please remember to back things up on the cloud. So when inevitably your Word document crashes midway, you have backups. And then finally, you'll want to get really familiar with your colleagues. It's tremendously helpful if another postdoc is writing a K99 at the same time as you, and you can provide feedback for each other, edits, etc. So that's kind of just a quick run through of some things that I found to be helpful. And I think I will stop sharing and pass it off to Carol and A.B. now. I'll also mention that we're having, you don't see A.B. because we are having hurricane-related power outages at A.B.'s home, and Carol's also having some difficulties with electricity. So welcome to 2020, and so we're just going to hope this works. So please be a little patient with us as we continue on here.
Okay. All right, let's see. Okay, so I think All right.
That looks great.
So good so far. So I'm going to talk today about the Pathways to Independence Award. I'm going to talk a little bit about the grant, kind of why it's different from other kinds of career development awards, a little bit about the grant preparation and the parts of the career development, which are the career development parts, and some information about the review of this particular type of application. So these are the current program announcements for the K99 R00. The NIEHS participates in 3 of these. The first of these is the parent announcement, and most of the institutes do participate in that announcement. There are 3 different announcements, and they differ in whether the research involves clinical trials or not, and whether the human studies are classified as basic experimental studies with humans. So that will determine the human studies parts of the application and the review of those, but essentially the other elements are the same. NIEHS also participates in the Mosaic announcement. Mosaic stands for Maximizing Opportunities for Scientific and Academic Independent Careers. And this program is coordinated by the National Institute of General Medical Sciences, and it's targeted to diversity candidates. In addition to the K99, this award requires that the candidate participate in one of 3 scientific cohorts which provide mentoring, networking, and professional development. NIEHS also participates in the announcement to support training in tobacco regulatory research. We participate in the main announcement, but not the one requiring a clinical trial. I might add that these tobacco regulatory K99s are funded by the Office for Tobacco Regulatory Research in the Office of the Director, so they don't really compete with the other NIEHS programs, although they will have an ES number. These applications are also reviewed along with the other tobacco science career development awards rather than those with NIEHS. So, and there are also a couple of other special announcements for the BRAIN program for diversity candidates, dental science, NIAID, physician scientists. And I've listed the links to all of the career development awards in the NIH, on the NIH website. So the Pathways to Independence has a slightly different structure and some different eligibility requirements or features from other kinds of career development awards. First thing is, it's really a hybrid of 2 different kinds of grants in one application. So it's got a career development award and a research grant. So the purpose of all career development awards is to provide protected time for career development and career transition. And since that's the purpose, is mainly a salary support offset and a small amount of research funding. The R00 is a research grant. It's funded to support a project which is described and is designed to be accomplished within the period of the research grant support with the budget requested. And a little background, the K99 R00 was developed in response several years ago to the increasing time that was being spent in postdoctoral positions and the increasing age in which investigators were getting their first research grant support. And so the purpose of this is to allow for an early transition to the faculty position, and there's also a mechanism to give some seed money when the independent faculty position is obtained. So the K99 mentored phase is 1 to 2 years. This allows some time for independent training, completing the postdoctoral experience and writing papers and finding the permanent faculty position. The career development part of the application should be written with these first 2 years in mind. At NIEHS, we have a budget which has a $60,000 cap on salary, then fringe benefits, and $20,000 of research support. This differs among the different institutes. So if you're not applying to NIEHS, you'll need to check that. The K99, like other career development awards, requires 75% commitment to this grant. The R00 is the research support for the independent faculty position. The budget is $249,000, and this is a total cost. So remember, when you go to your faculty position, that total cost means indirect cost plus the cost, your cost for research. So the amount that you'll have to spend on your project will be considerably less than the $249,000. Also, since this is a research grant, you do not have to spend 75% effort to this research, to the research grant. You're required to spend 75% effort in research, and that's the commitment that will be made by your institution. But if you can negotiate some hard money to support your research, this will mean that you will have more money left to devote to your research project. These are the eligibility requirements. I think you probably know all of the eligibility requirements, that you must be in a postdoctoral and a non-faculty position with fewer than 4 years. Notice that NIH has published a notice which allows for a 1-year automatic extension for childbirth. It's also possible that you can get an extension of this 4-year limit for illnesses or other circumstances, but this has to be requested, and the justification for this must be submitted and approved by the program officer at least 12 weeks before the submission date. And also recently, there has been an announcement, if you're running out of the 4 years eligibility, there'll be a 2 receipt date extension because of the COVID related closures for the next 2 receipt dates. Also note that this is the only NIH K award which does not have a citizenship requirement. So I get a lot of the questions that, if my title is not postdoctoral, am I still eligible? And the answer is maybe. There are a lot of titles across universities, and some of them are used to provide postdoctorals with a higher salary. And some of these are postdoctoral equivalents, but you will need to confirm eligibility with the institute that you plan to submit to before you submit the application. And give them a little time to look it up. The request must be accompanied by the published position description in official documentation, which affirms that this is not a faculty level position. There are positions in which the person may be mentored and still depend upon the mentor's research space, but some of these positions are considered faculty level by the institution. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the application content and the page limits. These are the page limits for the applications for the individual career development awards. I'm mainly going to talk about the 12 pages that are devoted to the candidate information and goals for career development, because that's where I get most questions, and are really well prepared and otherwise very meritorious announcement can be brought down by problems with the career development plan. However, as was mentioned earlier, the specific aims page is critical. This is the first thing that the reviewers will read and will many times set the tone for the review.
I'm A.B.E. BOYES. I'm a program officer. I'm one of the environmental epidemiology POs. We use the term program officer for the folks who are science subject matter expertise, and we're kind of your go-to for the sort of the first person you should talk to. And so that's both Carol and I's role. Carol is the director of our training program, and so a lot of the content that she has prepared for these slides is about the K99 in general, and she's the best person to answer questions about what was going to be in the next slide of, you know, what should you put in that candidate information and career development plan, because she has seen the most of them. But then once you apply, your application will be assigned to a program officer in your subject matter area. And so we can give you feedback on those aims relevant to the science. And so I think both Carol and then whatever your area program officer are the people to talk to as you develop the application. And so I will try my best to answer the Carol type questions that I would normally just say, you should talk to Carol about that. Joan, how are we doing?
We're good. We've got the application content candidate info slide up.
Okay. Hold on. Got another call coming in. I don't want to do that. Okay. So slide 8, I think, is the content. Is that where you are? Okay. So this is outlining the kinds of things that should go into that section. And you know, these details are in the RFA, but if you can get examples from other people, that can be helpful, because it's not always clear exactly how to put these together, because this portion of the K99 is unique to training programs. Let's go on to the slide 9 on what you need to talk about for the mentor. So what the review panel will be looking for is their record as a mentor. If you don't have the most experienced mentor, if there are other ways to include other training they have done. It's not to say you have to work for somebody who's got 20 years of experience, but they're going to be looking for, you know, how many previous students, where do those students go? And that's part of the application as well. Another key component is that they have to agree that the K99 research will transition with you into the R00 phase. So the idea behind this requirement is that we don't want you to leave and then be in the exact same niche area as your mentor, and they will still be pursuing grants on the same topics as well, because then you would be a junior faculty competing against an established faculty, and that would not be fair to the candidate to have to compete against them. And so the mentor essentially has to agree to let you take the project with you and not to pursue it themselves. Slide 10 is talking about, these are, and we just had the K99 reviews yesterday, and this did come up sort of, the components of the research plan have to cover both the K99 and the R00 phase. It should be a continuous type of idea, but do delineate which aims and which portions of aims that you plan to be part of the K99 and the R00, and be clear on the relationship to how this builds on your mentor's research, and obviously you develop these in consultation with your mentor, but then also how it will enable you to launch into a new independent career. And those should be part of the research plan section. So in review, there are 5 core criteria, and these are a little different than for a straight R or these are the K award criteria, looking at the candidate, their plan for development. The research plan still is an important component, and straight K awards, probably the career development plan is a little more heavily weighted in the research plan. The K99, it's a balance, and they do want this to be impactful research in the R phase as well. They will also evaluate that the team you've assembled in terms of mentors and collaborators, and then also the environment and the institutional commitment. And sometimes all parts of the application are important, and they will also weigh in on each other. And so the career development plan should match the research plan in terms of content and making sure you have the training you need in the K phase to execute the R phase. And similarly with the mentorship, if they see major weaknesses in the research plan, that can reflect poorly on your mentors and your team, because they think, okay, you know, you might have really powerful people listed, but how much time did they really have because this research plan is weak? And so they do tend to weigh those things together and can reflect on each other. This is not an independent writing assignment. You know, you are supposed to talk to other people and develop it together. It will show if you don't. So slide 12, what makes a strong candidate? Obviously, publication records, they're going to look at it. They're going to make sure, you know, it's not just quantity, that quality is important also, that you've had strong training to date, both as a graduate student and in your early postdoc, and that the plans build on that. They don't have to be, you know, staying exactly in the same line, but there should be a tie. And if you've got a non-traditional background, maybe you worked in a different field for a while or something like that, that's really appealing to reviewers, but they kind of want to see how it all connects together, and position you for what you're proposing. I wouldn't recommend you take a really hard 90-degree turn on your K99 and not have it related at all, because they're not going to think you're able to do that. And the key thing that I think reviewers really think about is this award going to launch this person into an independent career where they're going to be successful? And so they're looking for that potential to succeed and how the plan is going to get you there.
Okay, Abby, I think I'm back.
Oh, you're back, yay.
Yeah, well, this was
so
wonderful.
I tried to proceed without you.
Well, that's great. Okay, so there's some I was talking about some examples of candidate weaknesses, and reviewers might say things like there is a limited record of publication as a first author. Maybe the publications aren't related to the career goals or the research proposal. So sometimes people will be changing directions, but it will require more explanation of why, and more of a demonstration that you actually can succeed and that you're ready for independent research in this new areas. Another thing is make sure that you're consistent in the candidates and the bio sketch sections. They both talk about your background. And look, for example, one critique noted that the candidate mentions 10 publications, 10 during the PhD, 4 during the postdoctoral, but the bio sketch only had 7. Some of them were being submitted. So the reviewers will be looking for consistency and in the various parts of the application. They may say that things like leadership or presentation, communication skills haven't been demonstrated. A big one is that it's hard to see what parts of the research project are distinct from the mentors and area. And this might point to a low probability of being able to attain independence in the area of the proposed research. There may be problems with the referee letters. They're from individuals who maybe aren't really that familiar with the candidate's work in one phase, say maybe as a doctoral student. Alternatively, the reviewers may feel that the candidate has already achieved research independence and that there really isn't any need for further mentored training. Next slide. Okay, thank you. So the comments about strengths in the career development plan will say that something like the career goals are strong, that there's a detailed plan in place for fostering the candidate's path to independence, that the plan is logical, and then one thing builds on another. The plan includes strong institutional support and includes all of the things that were talking about before, and also that there are some very clear plans for evaluating the progress of the candidate. Some things that will come up as weaknesses include things like The candidate's proposed research is closely aligned to the mentor. And this is a big weakness, because if the mentor's if the mentor's research is too closely aligned, then there will be a different difficulty in separating the two, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Another point that comes up often is that the mentor's input into the plan is not apparent. And please remember that when there are mistakes in the application, when there are things that the reviewers see in the experimental design that perhaps maybe are not appropriate for the research, or there are certain critical references that have not been cited, the mentors will take this as a sign of lack of mentorship. So it's not, they will not say that you couldn't do this, they will say that your mentor hadn't read this, and if the mentor had actually read this, this wouldn't have been in the application. Another issue may be the co-mentors. You will probably need co-mentors in all of the main areas that, that you're proposing for the research plan. If the co-mentors are at different institutes or institutions, you will need to have a detailed plan in place to ensure the feasibility and sustainability of the arrangement. Also, the career development plan may not cover all the different areas of expertise, or it may not have enough depth in a particular area which is needed for foundation. Alternatively, you may be requesting training in areas that the reviewers feel that you're already proficient in. And there also may be some gaps for training in career skills like grant writing, laboratory management, teaching. Again, there may be a problem with vague plans for evaluating the projects or the progress. So the next one, next slide, please. Okay, a strong mentor, and these are some factors which may bring down the score. I think it's some of the strong mentors are very obvious, that the primary mentor may be an outstanding scientist and has a great track record of mentoring. There will be a candidate who has assembled an outstanding mentorship team with complementary expertise. There's a clear plan for regular interaction. The mentor shows that he or she is really involved with the candidate and is committed to the candidate and the candidate's research plan. Difficulties arise when, again, there are deficiencies in the application which point to the lack of input from the mentor. There is perhaps no definitive mentoring plan. It may be very vague. The mentor may not meet frequently enough with the candidate. The mentor may lack experience in key areas of research, or there may be a lack of expertise in the mentoring team in some key area. And again, the commitment of the mentors or a co-mentor may be very vague, which would question their commitment to the candidate. The environment is next. Okay, there are usually no major deficiencies of the environment, and the environment usually gets a very good score, but they may crop up when a needed resource or some expertise is not available. Also, sometimes the letters of reference may seem a little vague and canned and may not specifically address strengths and backgrounds of the candidate. And so these are the main things that can bring down the environment, but this is pretty rare. So next. These are the application components and page limits. You have the introduction to the resubmission, 1 page of specific aims, and we've now really covered the 12 pages of the application. You have written your specific aims. You've gotten your letters of support. You've gotten the letters from the mentors. So this should be about 33 or 34 pages. Next slide. Aha, remember you need 2 letters or 3 letters of recommendation. Next slide. Well, you still aren't done. There are a lot of additional required sections. Often the application, okay, we'll go through these. You have the training and responsible conduct of research, the letters of support. Oftentimes the application submitted will be actually 90 to 100 pages long. Next slide. Okay, so there it is. There are all the other parts that you eventually will need to work with. So the moral of the story is, next slide, the references and start early. So the next slide. These are I want to talk a little bit about the review and some of the review criteria. These are the review criteria for the Career Development Awards. The review criteria and questions that are used by the reviewer are always in the funding opportunity announcement. Down at the bottom, but they're there. If you're applying for a funding opportunity announcement, which is not the parent announcement, there may be some additional review criteria which are added. So be sure to look at these questions if you're applying to one of these other funding opportunity announcements to make sure that you address these. So there are 5 scoreable elements. At the study section, most applications are assigned to 3 reviewers to prepare written comments. These 3 reviewers will give each of these elements a score. They will also give an overall impact score. The reviewers will start with their overall score and discuss the application, but each study section member assigns their own individual number. Next page. Next slide. Okay, so this is sort of an example of what the scoring will look like and what the elements look like. All 3 reviewers thought that the candidate was that the environment was good. They gave them good scores. The scores for the mentors and the career development plan were favorable. Next. However, the research plan, the overall scores for the research plan were 3, 4, and 4. You'll note that the overall scores recommended were 3, 4, and 3 for an average of 3.3 or a priority score of 33. So this is what we usually see. The overall score is not the average of the element score, and it generally tracks the scores for the research plan. This is true of all types of grants. Next slide. Okay, this is a study of the relationship of the approach scores to the overall assigned impact score. This was published in the Open Mic. This is an e-column by Mike Lauer, who is the NIH extramural director. And it's on the NIH website. As you can see, the scores for the investigators and environment are quite good. The scores for the significance and innovation are better than the overall impact. But the overall score also always seems to track more of the approach. So when you get your summary statement back, that's probably what you're going to see, is that the overall score is going to really track the research plan scores. However, as I said, the weaknesses in the other elements can bring this down, so that you really need to pay a lot of attention to this. Next slide. So I know you've seen this chart before and are familiar with the NIH grants process, but I wanted to add a few comments which are specific to the K99 process and the NIEHS. Before you submit the application, it is important to contact a program officer and email a copy of your aims to make sure that the institute will accept the application. At NIEHS, I am the contact for all K applications administratively, but after submission of these applications, they're assigned to a program officer in the division based on the scientific portfolio. So you will be likely to be assigned to someone in the population health branch, and that person will be the program officer for your grant. If the aims are sent to me, I will forward them to a person in who I feel has the scientific portfolio corresponding to your application, and that person will be responsible for determining whether or not your application fits within the mission area of NIEHS. Next slide. Okay, so you were previously told a little bit about the reporter and how you can find like projects, but there's also a feature in the reporter which will match your proposal to institutes that fund similar grants and the program lists the program officer for those grants. And so the tab is under their matchmaker, and if you click on that, next slide, click on the matchmaker. Okay, you will get a screen here where you can enter the title of your project and the aims. Matchmaker will then produce a list of similar projects, not only the K99s, but all similar projects and the program officer for those projects. So this gives you a list of people you can start with. In addition, all of the program officers should be on each institute's webpage along with the description of their portfolio. By the way, this page can also be used to give a list of related publications. And it's a good idea to check these out since missing important publications can be a reviewer criticism. Next slide. So again, going back to the NIH grants process, the Office of Receipt and Referral also assigns the grant to a study section. The grant applications go to study sections, research grant applications go to study sections in the Center for Scientific Review. And it's appropriate to suggest study sections that you feel will fit your application. However, this is not necessary for K applications that are assigned to NIEHS. At NIEHS, all Career Development Award applications are assigned to special emphasis panels. And the scientific review officers who set up these panels are in the scientific review branch of NIEHS. So they have a lot of knowledge and experience with environmental health applications. In general, the NIEHS has two panels each round, one which reviews the K99 applications and a different one which reviews the other types of Ks. But the discretion in this is up to the scientific review officers, and if there are smaller numbers, they can combine these. You might check because the review locus may be different at different institutes. I know that some institutes do have K awards that are reviewed in CSR study sections. Next slide. Okay. There will be a time when you submit grants which will be reviewed by CSR, and there is a tool on the CSR website which can be used to find a list of possible study section assignments. This tool is similar to the reporter and the links are shown here. Next slide. So I'm going back to the NIH grants review process. The second level of review is by the National Advisory Environmental Health Sciences Council. And this is the congressionally mandated advisory board to the Institute. The makeup of the council includes both people from the research community and public representatives. So, and most of this meeting is open. It is webcast. If you want to join in, it'll be on the NIEHS website. And most of the role of the council is to bring transparency to the setting of the Institute programs and the research priorities. However, they do see all the grant applications and approve them, but there's a misconception generally of what this second level review entails. This is not a scientific review. The council is not made up so that they have the expertise to do scientific reviews. With a few exceptions, almost all the grant applications are approved in block. The motion is to concur with the study section. It is not to review the application. So if you wish to write a letter addressing the summary statement, you should discuss this with your program officer. If the principal investigator requests this, we do share these with our council, but generally they're not discussed by the council. They're made available to the council. The council generally will not re-review an application. It is just as productive to share them with the program officer for their information and use when discussing funding decisions. So the meeting to discuss funding decisions comes after the council meets. The applications are discussed by application types, by the unsolicited groups, and by each special funding opportunity announcement. Next slide. There are these are the four primary budget lines for grants at NIEHS. We go in each year with some budget lines set for each of these types of applications. The research grants include both the unsolicited grants and the funding opportunity announcement. They're aligned for the centers, which are generally these large core centers, for the training grants and fellowships, and the so-called other line. And the so-called other line includes career awards, the conference grants, and the education grants, and which are mostly summer research programs for undergraduate. So when we're discussing funding plans, these four budget areas don't directly compete with each other. So the applications in these groups are discussed separately, and the proposed pay plans are developed by the budget line. So your career development awards will be discussed in competition with other career development awards. Unfortunately, it's hard because there are differences in the scores range each time, and this is because it's steps. They're kind of review dependent, and I realize it's hard to put this information in context because there aren't any percentiles. But to know that your career development award is being discussed with other career development awards of the type that have been reviewed during that round. Next slide. So after you get a faculty position, being a reviewer is part of the educational process. This is just to let you know that there is an early career reviewer program for individuals who are at the early faculty stage. There's an online application, and if you wish to volunteer, you can send in your application and you may get a call. With that, next slide. I'm going to give this over to ABEE.
Thanks, Carol. As you can see, we kind of hit for each other occasionally here, and I would encourage you to reach out to multiple program officers throughout your career. There's no rule that you can't get lots of people's input. And so to that end, I want to talk a bit about the different staff that you will interact with at NIH, and this would apply to any institute. So Carol and I are both program administrators, And so we're more the science people you talk to before and after you apply. And then the scientific review officers are the ones who conduct the meetings. And so they also have a science background in their area that they are reviewing. And the third leg of this is grants management specialists. And they're the ones overseeing things like the budget and making sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed in the application and making the award. So program officers are often your first stop for scientists, but your business offices are probably going to be reaching out more directly to the grants management specialists. But these are the three people whose names you will see attached to your application as it moves through the process. A little more detail on each person's role there. And then at the bottom, you see sort of the color-coded timeline of who do you talk to when. And so it's green prior to submitting your application. And so that's when you need to be talking to program officers who can weigh in on that Ames page and give you input based on their experience with prior grants. After it's submitted, we don't have a role in the review process. Occasionally we might suggest reviewers, but we do not pick reviewers. In most cases, don't even know who they are. And unless we recognize a voice on a call, we can listen to review, but we cannot speak during review. And then the review officer is responsible for the conduct of the meeting, and they're the ones who write the summary statements. Half of grants do not get discussed, but you do still get the written critique from the individual reviewers. You just don't get the summary statement. And so the process is helpful, even if you don't get if you're not discussed, you'll still get written critiques back. And then once the summary statement is released, the person to talk to is again the program officer. We can help look through it, look for things that might be score driving weaknesses, as opposed to just sort of offhand comments that are, yeah, that's a noted limitation, but it's not really something you can do about. And discuss it about, you know, where things lie. And then once a grant is awarded, the people you're interacting with are both the program officer who oversees the annual progress reports and the grants management specialist who's responsible for making those awards and making sure that the notices of awards contain all the needed pieces. Just some tips on interacting with a program officer. You know, this would hold at all institutes, but sometimes you have to be a little diligent to find the right person. So we can give you input on Ames. We don't help you write applications. We might be able to answer specific questions about components of an application, but we really just give you input or look at that Ames page and give you our opinions based on our experience. We can advise sort of where we think it might be assigned for a review panel. If it's not a K99 that we, as Carol mentioned, we review in-house, so to speak, at NIHS. But, you know, Joan might call me up and say, hey, I've got this idea. What study section do you think would be good? And then you can make that request for like where an R01 might go. And then really also, most grants are going to have to be revised and resubmitted. And so we can help you think about what things might be the most score driving to consider in your revision. When should you reach out to a program officer? Well before the receipt date. Sometimes people call me up 2 weeks before it's due, and I sort of know that, well, there's no way you can really make meaningful changes and get it through your business office and submit it in time. In advance, give everybody on your team plenty of time to look at these Ames as you write. And also after the summary statement. It will be very tempting to call as soon as the scores come out. But the extent of our conversation is very limited at that point. We can comment, you know, if you come in with your K99 and you get a 15, wow, that's a really good score. That's probably going to get funded. I'm never going to say yes, it's going to get funded, because until the notice of award comes out, the answer is never yes. If you get a 45, then it's going to be like, yeah, no, that's not going to get funded. Most of the time, I'm probably going to say maybe, and we'll talk about it and what steps need to go. One thing about the K99s is because it's a special emphasis panel that brings together new people every time, there are no percentiles with the K99 scores. All you get is a score. And so it could be hard to interpret, you know, what does that mean? Especially when your mentors are used to going, well, what's the pay line and what's your percentile? So reach out to us when you have draft names and once the summary statements are released. And then at least at NIEHS, I think these are some of the faces that ISEE applicants would be talking to. So as Carol mentioned, she's the program director for the training programs. All of the content she talked about today, she's the best person to answer this question. But then the other 5 faces you see here are folks in the population health branch that oversee our epidemiology grants. We do have 2 men, Liam O'Fallon and Thad Shook, are also in population health branch, but they don't oversee a lot of environmental epi grants. So I just included the epi folks here. And there are a couple of new faces. So some of these people you might be familiar with if you've applied before, but Melissa Smar is brand new to us as of July, is coming to us from Emory, and she was actually a postdoc at NICHD before she was faculty at Emory. And so she's a new position, is going to be carving out some that were previously overseen by Bonnie and Kim and I. And so it used to be if you proposed gestational diabetes, you'd be in my portfolio as reproductive. But then if you were doing diabetes in adults, you'd be in Bonnie's portfolio. Well, she's going to look at metabolic syndrome in general across the life course. She's also taking fertility for my portfolios and such, her background. We have another new program officer in the lower right corner there, Lindsay Martin, who's taken over Sima Finn's portfolio. If you were familiar with Sima, who was really involved in community-based participatory research, and her background is in qualitative science, and also implementation and dissemination sciences. And so she's going to be developing more in that area as well. Sima had overseen a lot of our health disparities, and Melissa's going to be picking a lot of that up too. So the other people are Kim Gray, who's been a program officer for a long time overseeing the children's centers, and her expertise is in children's health and development and neurodevelopment. Basically anything neuro except autism is in Kim's portfolio. Bonnie oversees cardiovascular, respiratory, immune, kidney, and she's also our stats methods person. So she oversees the PRIME program for mixtures methods development. And myself in the lower left corner, since you can't see my face on the Zoom today. And I do pregnancy, women's health, cancer, weather-related, which we're seeing some of the impacts of today down here in North Carolina, weather-related impacts, bone health, and then I literally have other epi. So things that don't fit well in other places end up in my portfolio as well. And that's all I've got for you today. Thanks for listening to us. Here's our contact information for both Carol and I. You can also Google us with NIHS, and you'll probably get right to our staff pages. And program officer is your friend. That's what my graduate advisor told me. We're there to help you and help you prepare and then revise your applications and hope to really strengthen those applications as you go. I think you should think of a review and your summary statements as a gift of trying to help you improve your science, even though we know the process is long and challenging. And with that, I'll turn it back to Joan.